Traveling is his profession. Bradley Mayhew writes tourist guides, mostly about Asia. This time, he is working on a very special project, an adventure, an experiment. He retravels a route taken by a merchant from Venice more than 750 years ago. He is happy with any transport he can get. Always east, along the Great Silk Road. Through remote mountain ranges, inhospitable deserts and ancient cities, Bradley Mayhew follows the route of Marco Polo. From Venice to Beijing, through countries such as Iran and Afghanistan, 10,000 kilometers overland, a journey as great an adventure today as in Marco Polo's time. Ever since ancient times, travelers have stocked up on provisions and changed camels in Dunhuang. In China's desert-like province of Gansu starts the final leg of his long journey. He's already crossed 7 countries so far. China is more or less home turf for Bradley Mayhew. A friend has helped him out with a contact who must live somewhere around here. Fan Ji-jun, 54 years old, in the camel business for 25 years. Camels. Without them, there would be no caravans, no trade, no Silk Road. These hardy animals can go for days without food or water and don't mind heat or sandstorms. But carrying loads, let alone people, is not in the camel's nature. That's where the camel trainer comes in.
这骆驼呢，它主要就是训练的时候呢，它主要就是要先让它卧下来，卧呢就是说翘啊，主要用这训练这个让它卧下来，大概就得1个多月才能把它训练好。哎呀，这光放这个鞍子呢，可能就得个4、5天才能把这个鞍子放好，它就适应了，慢慢放了，它就不害怕了。
Every day, Fan leads his animals into the nearby dunes to exercise. Marco Polo describes with great respect the Mingsha, or dunes of the singing sands. If a caravan got lost, it was doomed. Therefore, the men who led the caravans were highly respected.
You do as you're told, young camel.
当心一点啊，骆驼很贵的，一个骆驼要5000多块钱的啊，注意一点。
Chow, 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 chow. Oh, chow, chow. Can't believe it! Good boy! Look at that! I'm a natural! Oh, there you go! Oh, good boy!
你做得很好。
This is about as Marco Polo as it gets, I think. Leading camels through the Gobi Desert. This is pretty much all I ever dreamed Marco Polo did when I was reading his book as a kid. This is classic stuff.
Eventually, it is time for the camels to earn their keep. The breeding and training of camels had almost disappeared in the oasis until tourism introduced new business opportunities. 250,000 tourists visit the Singing Sands each year, and Fan is only one of many camel trainers. China's middle class is growing rapidly and has discovered the joy of traveling and vacationing in their own country.
This is mass industrial scale Chinese tourism. New economic power translates into having fun in the desert, in the sand dunes. So this is the future of tourism in China, it seems to me. Dunhuang, the Jade Gate, they're just as exotic to Chinese travelers as they are to foreign travelers.
When they passed through here, Marco Polo, his father and uncle, had been on the road for 2 years. Marco Polo hints at how the exhausted Venetians must have felt to find shelter, fresh food and drinking water after a long desert crossing.
Well, Marco Polo describes this 30-day crossing of the Lop Desert. He talks about the goblins and the demons, the sandstorms that would limit your vision to just a couple of feet. So when you finally reach the green of this desert oasis, this was really the first sense of Chinese civilization, the first taste that you were heading into a great culture. The desert crossing was over. It was a place to kind of relax a little bit and get ready for the journey on.
Traders would pray and make offerings before crossing the Gobi, and then make grateful donations after surviving the passage unscathed. In this way, on the eastern edge of this desert, a magical place came into being. 700 caves hold the world's largest treasure trove of early Buddhist art. Today, China protects the grottos tightly. Only a few are open to visitors, and only under the supervision of a guide. It has not been forgotten that in 1907, 2 European archaeologists, some say art thieves, smuggled large parts of the Mogao Cave treasures to Europe. Rich traders endowed the cave monasteries with statues and ornate wall paintings that paid homage to Buddha, some dating back as far as the 4th century. They are perfectly preserved, thanks to the dry desert climate. The images depict episodes from the life of Buddha, his enlightenment, his teachings, and his sutras.
The image of the Buddha spread from Gandhara in modern-day Pakistan, came up over the mountains along the Silk Roads of Central Asia, and then dispersed all the way down through here, through China, into Japan, Korea, and every time slightly adapting, changing to the local styles, the local ways of thinking.
For centuries, the 700 caves of this monastery lay buried beneath the sands. In the year 1900, they were rediscovered, almost by chance.
The lost jewel, really, that was uncovered. It's beautiful. No, the real power of the Silk Road is that the Silk Road transported not only goods, spices, real hard things, but but also ideas, music, art, religion, faiths, technology. That was the real wonder of the Silk Road, and you can see that represented really quite special and beautiful here.
Originating in India, Buddhism reached China in the 3rd century AD. By the 13th century, when Marco Polo was on his travels and China was ruled by the Mongols, Buddhism was the state religion in the Middle Kingdom.
This is one of the first places that Marco Polo met Buddhism. He wasn't too kind about it, called them idolaters. He wasn't very happy about all the Buddhist statues. But from now on, Buddhism would follow him all the way to Kublai's court.
But it's still 2,500 kilometers to Beijing.
This guy's trying to cheat. I know what you're doing. They love it. They love it. There's a word in Chinese called runao, which is hot and noisy, which is like the absolute epitome of how things should be. Hot and steamy, noisy, shouting. It's sometimes it's too much, but a lot of the time it's great fun. Many lifetimes ago, when I was coming out of school, I decided for some reason, I still have no idea. Oh, well, there we go. Not quite sure to this day why. I decided to study Chinese at university. It was one of those decisions that just turns your life in a different direction, and for that I'm eternally grateful. You know, it opened my eyes to Asia and traveling. The first traveling I did was to practice my Chinese, really. So yeah, no, people thought I was crazy at the time. Now it's quite common to study Chinese, but 20 years ago, no one studied Chinese, and everyone was kind of scratching their heads, going, "What is he doing?" You know. But I'm pretty glad to have done it. Okay, so how do we play?
In Jiayuguan, the train crosses the Great Wall of China. The only way to pass through the Great Wall was through the gates of this fortress, built in 1372. Every school kid in China knows about Jiayuguan, the first pass under heaven. One of the most impressive landmarks along the Silk Road.
This is a hugely symbolic place in China. To the south, you've got the snow-capped Qilian Mountains. Just to the north up there, you've got the Mazhong or Horsemane Mountains. And in between, you've got this little gap. And right here comes the end, very end of the Ming Dynasty Great Wall of China. And this, for the Chinese, is the absolute end of the world. This is the end of civilization as they knew it. And from here marks the gate where all the travelers from Central Asia would come into here. So everyone, all the Silk Road traders, the missionaries, the refugees, the armies, they all funneled through this corridor right into the heartland of civilization.
Marco Polo doesn't mention the Great Wall at all. One reason why some historians question whether the Venetian even made it to China. There is no way he could have described Jiayuguan.
This didn't exist when Marco Polo came through here. Doubtless there were fortifications, doubtless this was still a strategic pass. There would have been some kind of garrison post here, but not quite on the scale that we see here.
Marco Polo's journey lasted from 1271 to 1295, a time when the Mongols ruled literally half of the world, from Beijing to Moscow to Hungary. At that time, Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, officiated as Emperor of China. Kublai's court was Marco Polo's ultimate goal. Here begins the so-called Hershey Corridor. For about 1,000 kilometers, it leads through the hostile Gobi Desert. The corridor is flanked by 2 mountain ranges and was the only route where water and food was readily available. Everybody had to pass through here. Ancient oases and garrison towns line the corridor like a string of pearls. This town, Marco Polo refers to it as Kanpichu, he must have particularly liked. He stayed here for more than a year. The town has even erected a monument to him. In China, everybody has heard about Marco Polo. The locals may not know many of the details, but one thing is for sure. Marco Polo was a good visitor. He described China in a positive, admiring way.
你好，你是什么地方的？地方人的。这个你听说了没有？那个 Marco Polo. I mean, Marco Polo certainly was the first person to bring home a portrait of China, of a great and resurgent civilization that had been unified after hundreds of years of chaos. So, in some ways, that portrait of China is valid today. You know, it's coming up, emerging as a great superpower as it was back in the 13th century. So, in some ways, the situation is similar. You could call the party chairman the closest thing to Kublai Khan in this part of the world, for sure.
This temple was the alleged home of the mother of Kublai Khan. It's even possible that the Chinese emperor was born here. In his book, The Description of the World, Marco dedicates many chapters to the Mongols, their customs, their art of warfare. In Zhangye, he focuses on Buddhism for the first time. He describes this temple of the great Buddha in great detail.
So in these, they have an enormous number of idols, both small and great, certain of the latter being a good 10 paces in stature. They're all highly polished and then covered with gold, and the great idols of which I speak lie at length. I'm pretty sure this is the one he saw. This is one of the few cases where Marco Polo wasn't actually exaggerating. He comes from definitely a medieval Christian background. He kind of disparages Buddhist followers as idolaters. But you can tell he's starting to warm to the place and warm to Buddhism a little bit as he goes along in his journey, especially when he reaches the court of Kublai Khan. He comes much more in contact with Buddhism, so he starts to kind of likening it a bit more to Christianity. He says they have a calendar and holy days like we do.
The next morning, Bradley is forced to hitch a ride. There are no buses to the mountains that rise just outside the town. Here at the foot of the snow-capped Kilian Shan, from the 4th century onwards, people began to carve out Buddhist grottos from the sandstone cliffs. Bradley learns that the Rock Cliff Monastery was destroyed in the 1970s during the Cultural Revolution. Today, 8 monks once again live here. One of them is Dao Tong, 60 years old. Stairs and walkways hewn into the rock lead up to the temple grottos. The Horseshoe Monastery was founded 1700 years ago, at the time of the Jin dynasty, Bradley hears. Luckily, Mao Zedong's Red Guards only partially destroyed it.
I mean, all religious temples in China have suffered since the 1950s. This place was partially destroyed in the Cultural Revolution. This was a time when Chairman Mao decided that all the four olds should be swept away. That we had to create a new society. You had to destroy what was traditional and what was Chinese. So a lot of the buildings were destroyed. The caves are still intact, but a lot of all the Buddhist icons would have been smashed, as they were throughout China, throughout Tibet. You know, it was a very sad time for Chinese history.
These days, the Chinese are turning to religion once again, although in a pragmatic way. Mr. and Mrs. Li pray for success in work and a good income for their newborn babies.
Buddhism for Chinese people is mostly about securing material wealth. You know, you'd come to a monastery to pray for a child, and if a child, then a son. You'd pray for a new car, for happiness, for wealth, for that promotion. I think a lot of people, especially older people, have had difficulties coming to terms with this new Chinese society, the new kind of capitalist way of looking at things, and life's become quite hectic and quite difficult, and they don't quite understand it. So, you know, I think a Buddhist temple like this offers a little escape, or a way to get some spiritual guidance, which perhaps, you know, is lacking in mainstream Chinese society. "30 years of atheism, it takes its toll on the spiritual life of a nation, I think. I think for the youth, probably capitalism is the main religion, but as you get older, it's nice to see. It's nice to see this happen.
Where once the polos passed by on camels, today there is a train. Miss Li, the train conductress, provides some entertainment.
This is the new China. The lady who works for the railways selling us toys as she walks through the aisles, trying to make a little bit of cash. Welcome to communism with Chinese characteristics. Right now the train is going through the Heshi corridor of Gansu province. It's got two parallel mountain ranges going on either side, so it acts as a funnel for all the Silk Road trade coming from Central Asia into China. And this goes all the way down to Lanzhou. That's up next.
By the time they had passed this city on the banks of the Yellow River, the Venetians had put the vast deserts of China behind them. They had reached the heartland of China.
Now this is Lanzhou. This is the first really big Chinese city I've seen on this trip, and pretty much the biggest city all the way since Tehran. About 4 or 5 million people. As you can see, the air quality is not great, but it's a lot better now than it was a few years back, and it was one of the world's top 10 most polluted cities. And this is where the Heshi corridor meets the Yellow River. You can see here, it's where the Silk Road hits the Yellow River.
It may not yet have reached the villages, but provincial cities like Lanzhou are now completely shaped by the new Western consumerist lifestyle. Bradley has to search long and hard before he spots one of the old-fashioned backstreet markets that were once everywhere in China.
There's been so much kind of rebuilding and demolishing of old neighborhoods like this, and they're kind of an endangered species now. The main streets all look the same in every Chinese city. It's all big, flashy food courts. So these kind of backstreet markets have a real neighborhood community feel, you know. 小姐，挺好吃，谢谢你，挺好吃。
In the northern parts of China, the staple food is noodles made from wheat flour. People eat them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
One of the great myths of Marco Polo is that Marco Polo brought noodles back to Italy with him, you know, but I wouldn't tell an Italian that his noodles came from China, and I wouldn't tell a Chinese person that his noodles came from Italy. So I think it's just another one of the myths surrounding Marco Polo.
Historians have studied Marco Polo's descriptions of China in great detail, and they have noticed some odd discrepancies. He didn't mention the Great Wall of China, nor chopsticks, nor does he write about porcelain, which at the time was produced solely in China. However, jade, China's most important precious stone, Marco does describe at length.
Jade's still fetching a high price 800 years later.
Marco doesn't say a word about tea, the national drink of China. But he does report admiringly on paper money, which came into use in Europe only 400 years later.
He was really impressed by Kublai Khan's paper money. It was still quite a rarity to him. He couldn't believe you could just print money.
The Venetian even mentions that if you print too much of it, its value goes down.
The Chinese characters was one thing, one of many things in China that Marco Polo didn't bother to mention. 怎么样？还可以吗？就是漂亮，就不好看。也好看，谢谢你。Looks like it's going to be a long trip. The road to the Mongol heartland is never an easy one.
The bus to Inner Mongolia leaves bang on time. Each day, over 1 million such long-distance coaches ply the roads of China.
The Chinese bus system is mind-bogglingly huge and works really well. Millions of people using it every day. It's the easiest way to get around this part of China.
From Lanzhou, it's about 1,500 kilometers to Shangdu, where Marco Polo finally met the Emperor of China, Kublai Khan, for the first time. Many means of transport later comes a different landscape. Grassland, sparsely inhabited, Inner Mongolia. Not very far from here lies Shangdu, where the summer palace of Kublai Khan once stood.
This guy's the reason Marco Polo came to China. That's also the reason why I've come here. Everybody here knows this guy, great Kublai Khan.
A friend has told Bradley about a man who everybody calls Batir, meaning hero. They want to meet at the ruins of the summer palace. The inner and outer walls of the huge area are easy to make out on a satellite map. It was in 1275 that Marco Polo finally arrived here, 3.5 years after his departure from Venice. His reports on Kublai Khan's summer palace fill several chapters of his book, a paean of praise on the power and grandeur of the great Khan, who in the 13th century ruled over the world's largest empire. Today, only parts of the city walls remain. Marco Polo enthuses about Shangdu, the mythical Xanadu, which was partly a town and partly a tent camp.
6公里还有6公里6公里就是可能是外面的城市。说库布莱汗要是他要喝酒，那个杯子没有人给他，那个杯子自己来，没有不用人。He talks about a big marble palace, a little kind of yurt-shaped pagoda made of lacquered bamboo. He talks of 10,000 white horses outside and great hunting expeditions. It's really quite a royal, very luxurious kind of summer camp for Kublai Khan. Marco Polo really gets into the, really creates a great feeling of what this place must have looked like 800 years ago.
Дээд нийслэл манай Монгол үндэстний соёл аж ахуйг өндөс соёр болгож хөгжсөн. Одоо ийм гот. Тэгэхээр нөл манай сайн ховлаа ханаа өөрийн буяараа дэлхийг чахарч өөрийн буяараа үндэстнийх нь соёл аж ахуйг бүгдийг зэрэгээр хөгжүүлсэн. Ийм монголчуудын сэтгэлд одоо хөжөөд ханах шиг юм сайн байна.
At the times of Marco Polo, they were the rulers of China. Today, the approximately 6 million Mongols in China are a minority that lives on the fringes of society. That Inner Mongolia is a so-called autonomous region doesn't change the fact that Beijing clearly calls the shots. In the region around Shangdu, people still live the old Mongolian way of life. The song, composed by Batir himself, praises the great bygone days when Kublai Khan founded the Yuan dynasty. Today, Han Chinese wrinkle their noses when thinking of the times when barbarian horsemen ruled the Middle Kingdom.
Like most of the nationalities in China, the Mongolians, they're very much tied to the Chinese system. So the young Mongolian kids are learning Chinese in school, and you have to speak Chinese to get by in modern-day China.
For some reason, the mighty Kublai Khan took a shine to the three travelers from Venice. Young Marco in particular gained the trust of the Emperor of China. For 17 years, Marco Polo enjoyed his protection and privileges, even joining the imperial administration for a time. Just as Marco Polo was enjoying the festivities in Shangdu, the Khan was putting the final touches to his new capital, 7 days' ride away. And when the Emperor of China and his entourage moved to Kanbalik, today Beijing, Marco Polo was with them.
Hi honey, it's me. Yeah, how are you? Good. Yeah, I'm in Beijing. You know, I was supposed to come home next Tuesday. Well, I've had to kind of extend it by a couple of weeks, if that's all right. Yeah, I know. Maybe John can help you with that. Maybe John can help you with that.
Bradley Mayhew, an Englishman, is married in the United States. It's been a long time since he enjoyed some Western music, and there's plenty of it in Beijing. In this mega-city of 16 million people, not much is left from the era of Marco Polo and Kublai Khan, at least at first glance. But the main traffic axes of Beijing still run exactly where the Mongols once laid them out.
Marco Polo writes that Kambalik streets were so straight and wide that you could see from one end to the other, from one gate to the next. Looks like Beijing's communist city planners like the same kind of system as the Mongols.
And also the drum tower stands exactly where it stood in Marco Polo's times. The 24 drums sounded the hour to the city's inhabitants. They also announced the opening and the closing of the city gates. Close by the drum tower lay the center of power of the vast empire, the palace of the Mongol emperor. Marco Polo described the palace vividly. What remains today dates largely from the Ming dynasty, which defeated and succeeded the Mongols.
When the Ming dynasty came to power in about the 14th century, they smashed and kind of swept aside everything that belonged to the Yuan dynasty. But what Marco Polo describes is very, very similar to what we see today. We see the walls, the palace, the corner gates he describes. So the layout of this city is very, very similar to Kublai Khan's original palace.
After an epic journey, Marco Polo had finally reached his destination. He had arrived at the very heart of the Middle Kingdom. Today, the Emperor's Palace, the so-called Forbidden City, is China's #1 tourist attraction. Up to 50,000, mostly Chinese, visit every day.
The Mongols didn't really know much about building cities, they knew more about destroying them, so they used Chinese architects, Chinese architecture. So although the actual buildings are not these ones, they must have looked something like this. It must have really dazzled young Marco Polo.
The Palace of Heavenly Purity was where the Emperor made his decisions.
This is the heart of the imperial city where the Emperor gave his audiences. Surrounding here was the imperial city, forbidden to everyone except from the Emperor's court. Outside here was Beijing city, so this was really the very heart of the Chinese Empire. All roads led to this very nerve center.
It's quite amazing that the Emperor actually found time for Marco Polo. Tianmen, the gate of heavenly peace. Thousands take their pictures in front of this Beijing landmark, where in 1989, China's democratic movement was brutally crushed.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. Bye-bye. So this is Tiananmen Gate. This is where Chairman Mao stood right up there on the balcony, proclaimed that the Chinese people had stood up and proclaimed the People's Republic of China. This is also Chang'an Street. This is where the very edge of the Yuan dynasty walls were. So this marked the very edge of Kublai Khan's imperial city, from one great imperial power to the next. Wan Shui Mao Zhuxi, 10,000 years to Chairman Mao.
A tugboat and 11 barges, each loaded with 1,000 tons of coal, headed for the booming industries of eastern China, explains Captain Meng. After his arrival in Beijing, Marco Polo did not return to Europe immediately. He stayed in China for 17 years, crisscrossing the huge country in numerous voyages, supposedly as an envoy of the Great Khan. Is this really possible?
Yeah, it's certainly possible that Marco Polo was in the employ of the Great Khan. The Khan used a lot of foreign advisors because he was surrounded by the sea of Chinese. He didn't really just trust them very much. So certainly as a tax collector or an official, it's very likely. But the problem is there's no records in the Chinese.
请问你在讲的是什么？我听不懂。
你听不懂我说？我说那个 Marco Polo 他来不来中国，我们不太清楚他真的来这里还是他写了。
听不懂。
Captain Meng's interest lies in transporting coal. Marco Polo is not really his cup of tea.
There's a lot of things that Marco Polo doesn't mention. That's the main trouble, but a lot of people don't believe he actually came here. For example, tea. How could you not write about Chinese tea or porcelain? The chopsticks, Chinese characters, acupuncture, foot binding. I mean, some of these things can be kind of explained away. He was mostly surrounded by the Mongol court. He didn't have that much access to the Chinese world, so he wouldn't necessarily have seen, you know, for example, foot binding. He wouldn't have been that close to Chinese families to have seen that. But there are certainly some curiosities as to why he left these things out.
The Grand Canal of China, 1,800 kilometers long. The world's oldest and longest man-made waterway still connects the capital Beijing with the city of Hangzhou in the east of China. Mainly coal and coke are transported.
我可以试试唱吗？
你可以，
可以吗？
来，请。
我现在我是老板。
老板不在这里，老板都是在家里。
是司机。
对对对，你是司机。
司机，
你就是司机。
外国司机。
司机。按一下。对对对。
That's more like it. Get out the way.
In the province of Shandong, the coal convoys cross a large lake. Here, people are still fishing the old Chinese way, with trained cormorants. Marco Polo must have seen this unusual fishing technique. The necks of the birds are loosely tied, so that they can't swallow larger fish. The Venetian generally has an eye for the strange or unusual, but about cormorants, he says nothing. Rice, salt, ceramics, and the luxurious silk were shipped to Beijing on the Grand Canal and its side waterways. Numerous cities sprang up along the canal, densely populated and highly developed, shaped by trade, crafts, and an emerging middle class, far ahead of the medieval cities of Europe.
The Chinese cities on the southern part of the Grand Canal were really rich, booming centers of trade, lots of silk production going on, and huge populations. I think Marco Polo would have been really impressed by that, especially coming from the more nomadic societies of Central Asia. This would have really been a big eye-opener for him.
Countless spinning and weaving workshops can still be found in Zhejiang province, to this day China's main silk-producing region.
This region's been a stronghold of silk production for centuries, including during Marco Polo's time. Would have been millions of farmers all raising silkworms, and it's still going strong. Feels very smooth and very soft, just like you'd expect it to. For me, it feels like I've been following this story of silk all the way from Venice. This is pretty much the source. In a way, it feels like, right here, this is where the silk road starts. 再做一次可以吗？
哦，可以的。
the Grand Canal of China terminates in Marco Polo's favorite city.
He wrote about the bridges so tall that entire fleets could pass through them. This was a very good time for Marco Polo's visit. The Kublai Khan had just taken the city and most of the country, but the cultural sophistication of the Sung dynasty was still there. The city was pretty much left intact. This really was one of the great, cities of China at the time, probably the biggest city in the world, and a very sophisticated, refined place. For the city is beyond dispute the finest and the noblest in the world. Marco Polo definitely thought this was the most incredible city he'd visited on the whole of his travels. Even today, to most Chinese, Hangzhou is synonymous with how a city should be, how scenery should be. It's this perfect Chinese mix of beautiful natural scenery, the water and the mountains, mixed with the man-made touches that just make it that bit more refined and sophisticated. It's a huge tourist destination for the Chinese. Everyone wants to come to Hangzhou at least once.
Hangzhou, the Venice of the East, is viewed as a magical, romantic place in China. Marco Polo writes of the angelic women, 12,000 stone bridges, 3,000 heated public baths, the pepper market, and the city's perfect administration.
It says inside the city there is a lake which has a compass of some 30 miles. And all around it are erected beautiful palaces and mansions of the richest and most exquisite structure that you can imagine, belonging to the nobles of the city.
Marco Polo describes the splendid pleasure boats with their courtly parties as if he were in Hangzhou only yesterday.
It's amazing how little has changed in 800 years almost. His journey wasn't necessarily unique, but the book that he wrote, the information that he put down for subsequent generations, that really changed, the course of exploration and geography. And it had so much information that it took, hundreds of years for Europe to kind of gradually take it all in and accept that was the face of Asia that they didn't know about.
The three Venetian travelers stayed in China for 17 years. Not really by choice. Conflicts between the Mongolian conquerors had erupted along the length of the Silk Road. Although the Venetians had got accustomed to life in China, the traveling, the food, the tea ceremonies, they must have become homesick over the years. Marco Polo was tired. He was now 37 years old. It was time to go home.
There's always a mixture of emotions when you come to the end of a trip. I'm glad to be heading home, but there's always a certain sadness that the trip's ending and all this input is coming to a close. But it'll be certainly be very nice to see my wife, and very nice to wear a different shirt as well. It's probably the best.
In the year 1291, a chance to travel back home appeared suddenly and unexpectedly. Kublai was sending a princess to Persia, where she was to marry a second cousin of his. The Polos were allowed to accompany her on her ship. It took them another 3 years to reach their hometown. A quarter of a century had passed since their departure.
When the three Polos arrived back home, they probably came in big, long Mongol cloaks, big furry hats, big shaggy beards, and honestly, no one recognized them. It was only later, when they stripped open their old raggedy cloaks and all these jewels and rubies and diamonds fell out, that they were really taken seriously.
For Bradley, it's time to start working on the write-up of his journey. For one last time to the Corte del Milione, where Marco Polo once lived. Even though questions remain, Marco Polo's journey, together with his book, turned him into a legend. A myth that lives on to this day.
Having traveled along much of the route that Marco traveled, I find it hard to believe that he didn't go to China, despite all the errors, all the omissions, all the exaggerations, the fact that no one believed him when he got home. When you take the book and you're there in the place, it matches up, it fits, and it seems to me that he must have made this trip. Maybe not quite the way he describes it, maybe not quite in the route that people allege that he made, but I think it's beyond dispute, absolutely. It's been amazing to follow in his footsteps. It's been a hard trip, it's been a long trip. You know, Marco Polo took 27 years, didn't quite take us that long, but it's been amazing. It's been an epic journey all the way across the breadth of Asia. And yeah, it's amazing extremes. Sometimes burning in the desert, sometimes freezing on the top of a mountain pass. But yeah, it's one of the ultimate overland trips you can make.